Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into some JFK files today.
Sounds intriguing.
Yeah, it should be interesting. We've got a whole stack of articles here from the Dealey Plaza Echo, specifically their spring 2013 issue.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we've got, let's see, personal reflections, some in-depth historical analysis,
Okay.
and even some investigative pieces.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we're going to try to distill kind of the key insights and maybe some surprising details from these articles and hopefully give everyone listening a well-rounded kind of understanding of, all the information they're presenting.
Well, I always find it interesting to explore these kind of niche publications because you often find that there are people who are very passionate about the subject and they really pore over primary sources and they're looking for inconsistencies and trying to find and piece together alternative explanations for things.
Yeah, like a treasure hunt for truth, right?
Absolutely.
And sometimes you find these like small details that really shift your whole perspective.
Yes.
Like in this first piece here by Chris Galley, he recounts his first trip to Dealey Plaza.
Wow.
And he was shocked by how small it actually is.
Really?
I know, right? I mean, we've all seen the footage, the photos.
Right.
But he says it feels totally different standing there in person.
I can imagine. Yeah, I think that's common with a lot of these historical sites that we try to understand through the media and the representations that we see, but then you get there and it's like,
Totally.
this is much different than I imagined.
Yeah, it's like you think of this huge, sprawling plaza, but he points out you could practically throw a baseball across it.
Wow.
It really makes you consider those images we've seen and, how those might be framing our understanding of the assassination.
Right, right.
And speaking of framing, he also mentions how close Abraham Zapruder was to the motorcade when he was filming that, infamous footage.
Oh, wow.
It's crazy. The fact that Zapruder managed to keep that camera rolling amidst the chaos is incredible.
That's amazing. Yeah, because you would just think that in a moment like that,
I know.
everything would just kind of fall apart.
Yeah, like survival instincts kick in. And
Yeah,
exactly. So it really speaks to that moment,
Yeah.
You're not just watching a historical event unfold. You're experiencing it through the lens of someone who was right there. Absolutely.
Wow.
His account really drives that home.
Okay.
Then he goes on to talk about visiting the grassy knoll.
Right.
That spot behind the fence where some believe a second shooter might have been hiding.
Right.
And based on actually being there, seeing the layout, he started to question the logistics of that theory.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's one thing to speculate, on paper, to draw lines on diagram, analyze angles.
Yeah.
But to actually be in the physical space, taking in the terrain, the sight lines,
Yeah.
he said it kind of forced him to confront like the practicality of certain scenarios.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and it makes you realize that even eyewitness accounts, even those taken immediately after the event,
Right.
can be shaped by shock, confusion,
Trauma.
the power of suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Memory is such a malleable thing, especially under duress.
Yes.
So when we're dealing with an event as traumatic and chaotic as the JFK assassination,
Right.
it's essential to consider those human factors.
For sure.
So Scally also visits the Sniper's Nest exhibit at the 6th floor museum.
Okay.
And he makes this really interesting observation. He says, the shot that Oswald supposedly took from that window
Right.
wouldn't have been that difficult, especially for someone with Oswald's marksmanship skills.
That is interesting because that brings up the question of
right?
if it was a relatively easy shot, then does that strengthen the case against Oswald, or does it point to a different scenario where he was being set up?
It's like the more you learn, the more complicated it gets. Okay, so get this. Scally's trip takes an even deeper dive when he joins a tour led by Jerry Dealey.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like a prominent JFK historian.
Okay.
And they went all over Dallas. Zapruder's grave, the rooming house where Oswald lived,
Oh, wow.
even the former Dallas Police Headquarters basement, where Oswald himself was shot.
That's quite the itinerary.
I know. What I find really interesting about Scally's account is the emotional undercurrent.
Yeah.
He's not just reporting facts. He's conveying the weight of history that permeates these locations.
Yeah, you can almost feel it.
Totally. It gives you chills just reading about it.
Yeah.
It kind of sets the stage for our next article, which tackles another pivotal moment in the JFK saga, the murder of Officer J.D. Tippit.
Okay.
This piece by Alaric Rosman argues that the official narrative, the one that pins both Kennedy and Tippit's deaths on Oswald as a lone gunman, was essentially predetermined by Washington.
Oh, wow. So he's suggesting that there is some kind of effort to steer the narrative from the get-go.
Yeah. and maybe even frame Oswald.
Hmm.
He points to some, like, eyebrow-raising details, like suspiciously timed statements from figures like Robert Kennedy,
Oh, wow.
maybe before crucial evidence was even collected.
Right, because Robert Kennedy was JFK's brother.
Right, and he was the Attorney General at the
Right,
time.
so he was very much involved.
Yeah, so his pronouncements about the case carried a lot of weight, especially in those early chaotic hours.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, those early statements really make an impact on public perception.
Yeah, it's like laying the foundation for a building, Once it's laid, it's hard to change the structure.
Right.
So Rosman is basically saying that the official narrative about Oswald was built on shaky ground,
Okay.
maybe even intentionally.
Right.
And he brings up a really fascinating piece of evidence that's often overlooked.
Yeah.
An early affidavit from a woman named Mrs. Markham,
Okay.
who witnessed Tippett's murder.
Right.
Now, her account contradicts key details of the official story, but it's strangely absent from many prominent accounts of the assassination.
Why would that be? That's interesting.
I know, right? It's like finding a missing puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit the picture you thought you were building.
Yeah, for sure.
So then Rosman brings up Tippett's funeral.
Okay.
He describes it as this grand, almost theatrical spectacle organized in record time, and he suggests it was part of a larger effort to solidify the narrative of Oswald's sole guilt and portray Tippett as a martyr.
Interesting, yeah, because symbols,
I know.
especially in a case as high profile as this, they're incredibly potent.
Totally.
And if they frame this funeral as this grand, heroic event, it would have undoubtedly had an impact on public opinion.
Yeah, it's like a stage production, right?
Yeah.
You've got the hero, the villain, the tragic victim, all playing their parts in this carefully constructed narrative.
Yeah.
And if Rosman's right, that narrative might have been designed to distract from other possibilities, other truths that might have been lurking in the shadows.
Right, so that brings us back to that question. If Oswald was being framed, if this lone gunman theory was a fabrication, what role did Tippett's murder play in that scheme?
It's a chilling thought, isn't it?
Okay.
And it leads us to our next article, which really dives into the nitty-gritty of police communications on the day of the assassination.
Okay.
This one is by John Wassell, and it's a deep dive into the world of Oak Cliff radio patrol officers. He analyzes their transmissions, their movements,
Wow.
basically reconstructing a minute-by-minute timeline of what was happening on the ground.
That's amazing, the level of detail in this work.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Like he's piecing together a mosaic,
Yeah.
using these fragmented transmissions to create a clearer picture of the chaos and confusion that reigned in the aftermath of the assassination.
Wow.
He highlights how strictly controlled radio patrol officers were back then.
Right.
They couldn't just deviate from their assigned duties or locations without specific authorization. It paints a very different picture from the movies, where cops are always going rogue and chasing leads on their own.
Exactly. I was going to say, because in the movies, it seems like
I know.
they have a lot more freedom than they probably did back then.
Totally. And it also highlights the importance of understanding, like, the context of communication at that time.
Right.
This was long before cell phones and instant updates. Police relied heavily on radio dispatch, and those transmissions were subject to delays, interference, human error.
Yeah.
And speaking of human error, Wassell uncovers some pretty interesting inconsistencies in the radio logs.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like, for example, he points out that the order for officers Tippett and Nelson to move into central Oak Cliff was likely issued because most officers had already left for Dealey Plaza after the assassination.
Oh, wow. So it's like
I know.
things weren't being communicated properly.
It's almost as if there was a deliberate effort to create confusion, to muddy the waters. And it gets even weirder when Wassell points out that the dispatcher seemed to believe Tippett was still in central Oak Cliff when he was shot,
Oh, wow.
despite Tippett having radioed in his location earlier.
So again, more miscommunication, or are we talking about something else?
Right. These discrepancies, these apparent contradictions in the official record, they fuel the fire of doubt.
Absolutely.
If the lone gunman narrative is solid, why are there these gaps and inconsistencies in the communication logs?
Yeah.
It's like those radio transmissions are whispering a different story. A story that doesn't quite align with the official version of events, And it makes you wonder what other secrets might be hiding in those archives waiting to be deciphered.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
So are you ready to explore what else we have in this stack of articles?
Absolutely. Let's dive in. What else have we got?
Okay, so we've just scratched the surface of these Dealey Plaza Echo articles.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to unpack.
Okay.
We've got a couple more pieces that really dig into some intriguing alternative theories.
Sounds good.
Are you ready to dive deeper?
Let's do it.
All right, so we've got another piece by Alaric Rosman.
Okay.
Remember, he's the one who argued that the official narrative about Oswald might have been predetermined.
Mm-hmm.
This time, he tackles something called the theory of the three Oswalds.
The multiple Oswald theory.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's always interesting.
It is.
It suggests that there may have been several individuals impersonating Lee Harvey Oswald, which could explain some of the conflicting accounts of his whereabouts and behavior leading up to the assassination.
It's kind of like that movie plot device where they use a body double to fool people.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the most intriguing aspects of this theory focuses on Oswald's alleged fluency in Russian.
Mm-hmm.
Some witnesses claimed he spoke Russian perfectly, while others said his Russian was heavily accented or even non-existent.
So are we talking about mistaken identity?
Mm-hmm.
Or something more deliberate, like a coordinated effort to create confusion?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rosman presents a compelling case, but it's important to remember that a lot of this is based on piecing together circumstantial evidence and witness testimony, which, as we know, can be unreliable or subject to interpretation.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where some of the pieces are missing and others might be from a completely different box.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, that ambiguity is part of what makes this case so fascinating. It's about sifting through those layers of uncertainty, trying to make sense of a complex and often contradictory set of facts.
All right, so let's move on to our last article from this Dealey Plaza Echo issue.
Okay.
It's by Tony Austin, and he takes a slightly different approach.
Okay.
He focuses on overlooked evidence from Oswald's room.
Okay.
Specifically, the things that Oswald didn't take with him when he supposedly fled the Texas school book depository.
That's an interesting angle.
Yeah, focusing on the absence of evidence rather than its presence.
Yeah, what did he leave behind, and what does that tell us?
Well, according to Austin, Oswald left behind a travel bag, spare clothes, toiletries, even his passports.
That is strange.
If he was planning on going on the run, wouldn't you expect him to grab those essentials?
It would seem so, yeah. Right.
Logically.
Yeah. So Austin proposes that this lack of preparation could suggest that Oswald might not have been acting alone, or perhaps he didn't actually shoot the president at all.
Interesting.
Okay, so maybe he thought someone else was going to help him get away. That's a possibility. Or maybe he was supposed to meet someone. He was told to go to the Texas theater where he was ultimately apprehended to meet someone who was going to help him escape.
Hold on. This is starting to sound like a spy movie.
Wow.
Secret rendezvous, double agents, people getting framed for things they didn't do.
Yeah, it does sound a little far-fetched.
It's almost too wild to believe.
But again, we have to remember this is speculation.
Right.
Based on Oswald's actions, not concrete proof.
Right.
But the JFK assassination is full of these what-ifs that keep researchers and historians debating to this day.
Okay, so let's take a step back and try to make sense of all this.
Okay.
We've got personal reflections on visiting key assassination locations, investigations into the Tippit murder, deep dives into police communications, analysis of evidence both present and absent.
Yeah.
It seems like every article raises more questions than answers.
Well, that's the nature of the JFK assassination. It's a case shrouded in mystery and controversy, even after all these years.
It really is.
The articles in Dealey Plaza Echo encourage us to dig deeper, question assumptions, and really weigh the evidence when forming our own conclusions.
So what are some of the key takeaways you think our listeners should be mulling over?
Well, first and foremost, I think these articles highlight the importance of considering multiple perspectives.
Okay.
The official narrative, while presented as definitive, is not without its flaws and inconsistencies.
Right.
And when you start exploring those inconsistencies,
Yeah.
you open up a whole new world of possibilities.
Right. It's like the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And that can be both exciting and unsettling.
Exactly. It's about embracing the ambiguity,
Yeah.
acknowledging that there may not be easy answers, and engaging in critical thinking to form your own informed opinion.
It's like those optical illusions.
Yes.
Where you see one thing at first glance, but then you shift your perspective
Right.
and suddenly a whole new image emerges.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And I think developing that ability to shift perspectives, to question our assumptions is essential, not just for understanding history, but for navigating the complexities of the world around us.
It's like we need to be critical thinkers,
Yes.
to be willing to challenge the information we're given and to dig deeper for the truth.
Absolutely. And that's especially important in today's world,
Right.
where we're constantly bombarded with information from all sides. We need to be able to discern fact from fiction,
Right.
to identify bias, and to form our own informed opinions.
So in a way, exploring the JFK assassination isn't just about unraveling a historical mystery.
Right.
It's about developing those critical thinking skills that we can apply to our own lives.
Exactly. It's about honing our ability to analyze information, to weigh evidence, and to draw our own conclusions.
Yeah.
And those skills are invaluable no matter what field you're in or what challenges you face.
Wow, that's a really empowering thought. It's like this deep dive has given us more than just knowledge about the JFK assassination.
Right.
It's given us tools to navigate the world with more awareness and discernment.
I think that's a great way to sum it up.
Yeah.
And while we may never have all the answers about what truly happened on that fateful day in Dallas,
Right.
the process of exploration itself has been incredibly valuable.
Yeah. It's like the journey is just as important as the destination.
Absolutely.
And even though we've reached the end of this particular deep dive, I have a feeling that the questions and insights we've uncovered will continue to resonate with us.
I agree. The JFK assassination is one of those historical events that continues to fascinate and intrigue us. And I have no doubt that new theories and evidence will continue to emerge, prompting us to re-examine the past and grapple with its complexities.
Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
there's one more article I wanted to touch on.
Okay.
It's another piece by Alaric Roseman, and this time he delves into a particularly intriguing angle: the potential involvement of the Russians in the JFK assassination.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so this is where the story takes a turn towards Cold War espionage and international intrigue.
Okay.
Roseman explores the possibility that the Russians might have had more to do with the assassination than they officially admitted. He points out that the KGB, the Soviet intelligence agency,
All right.
seemed very interested in Oswald when he defected to the Soviet Union.
Okay.
They kept him under close observation and even offered him a more comfortable life than most defectors would receive.
That's interesting, that unusual treatment. Why would they be so accommodating to someone like Oswald?
Right. It's not like he was bringing top secret information with him.
Exactly.
So Roseman suggests that the KGB might have been intrigued by Oswald's potential for manipulation, seeing him as someone they could use for their own purposes.
It's a fascinating theory. But as with many aspects of the JFK assassination, concrete evidence is elusive. However, it's important to remember that the Cold War was a time of intense paranoia and suspicion.
Yeah.
And both the United States and the Soviet Union were engaged in all sorts of covert operations.
It's like you can't really trust anything at face value because everyone has their own secrets and agendas.
Exactly. Rosman's article reminds us that the JFK assassination can't be viewed in isolation. It was a product of its time, shaped by the geopolitical tensions and ideological battles of the Cold War.
So does Roseman offer any concrete evidence to support his theory about the Russians?
Well, he doesn't present any smoking guns, so to speak.
Okay.
But he does highlight some intriguing circumstantial evidence.
Like what?
Like the fact that the KGB seemed to downplay Oswald's significance after the assassination, despite their previous interest in him.
That's pretty suspicious.
It is suggestive.
Yeah, like they were trying to cover their tracks.
Perhaps, and Rosman argues that the KGB's silence on certain aspects of Oswald's time in Russia
Right.
might be concealing a deeper truth.
So we're back to missing puzzle pieces and hidden agendas.
It seems so, but that's what makes this case so endlessly fascinating.
It really is.
Every new piece of information, every alternative theory adds another layer to the mystery.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, only to find another onion underneath.
Yeah.
You never quite reach the core, but the journey itself is what keeps you going.
Well said. And as we've seen with these articles from the Dealey Plaza Echo,
Yeah.
that journey can be both intellectually stimulating and emotionally challenging.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront the uncertainties of history and to acknowledge that the quest for truth is often an ongoing process, not a destination.
So are you ready to move on to the final part of this deep dive?
Absolutely. Let's synthesize what we've learned and see if we can draw some meaningful conclusions from this exploration.
All right. So We've covered a lot of ground here. JFK assassination theories, different perspectives on the official narrative. We even touched on some Cold War intrigue.
Yeah.
It seems like we've got more questions than answers at this point.
Well, yeah, I think that's often the case when you're dealing with these complex historical events, especially ones as controversial as the JFK assassination, The deeper you go, the more you realize how much we just don't know for certain.
It's humbling, isn't it?
Yeah.
To think that even after all the research, all the investigations,
Yeah.
there's still so many unanswered questions.
Absolutely. But that doesn't mean we haven't gained anything, I think we've gleaned some valuable insights by examining these different perspectives
Right.
and challenging those assumptions that we often have about this case.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the things you think our listeners should really be thinking about?
Well, I think first and foremost is recognizing that history is not always a neat and tidy narrative.
Right.
It's messy, it's contradictory, it's open to interpretation.
Yeah.
And the JFK assassination is a prime example of that.
It is. It's like we want simple explanations. We want, good guys and bad guys.
Right, exactly.
But the reality is always so much more nuanced.
It is. And I think these articles from the Dealey Plaza Echo, they really drive that point home. They encourage us to, to question that official narrative,
Yeah.
to think about alternative explanations, acknowledge the limitations of our knowledge.
It's like those optical illusions,
Yeah.
You look at it one way and you see one thing, but then you shift your perspective and a whole new image emerges.
Exactly. And I think that's so important,
Yeah.
to be able to shift your perspective, to question your assumptions, not just for understanding history, but for navigating, the complexities of the world around us.
Yeah, we need to be critical thinkers.
Yeah.
Challenge the information we're given, really dig deeper
For sure.
for the truth.
Especially in today's world,
Oh, yeah,
when
yeah.
we're just bombarded with information from every direction. We have to be able to figure out, what's fact, what's fiction, where the biases are, and really form our own opinions.
So in a way, this whole JFK thing, it's not just about, a historical mystery.
Right.
It's about developing skills
Yeah.
that we can use in our own lives.
Absolutely. It's honing that ability to analyze information, weigh the evidence, and, draw your own conclusions. And those are invaluable no matter what you do.
Wow, that's really great. I like that.
Yeah.
It's like this deep dive gave us more than just, knowledge about JFK. It gave us tools that we can use in our lives.
Tools for thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way to sum it up.
Yeah.
And while we may never have all the answers about what happened in Dallas,
Right.
just that process of exploring has been really valuable.
Yeah, it's like the journey is as important as the destination, right?
Exactly.
So even though we're at the end of this deep dive, I feel like the questions we've raised, the things we've learned,
Yeah.
will stick with us.
They will.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive
Absolutely.
into the JFK assassination.
It's been a pleasure.
It really has.
Okay.
And to everyone listening, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep searching for your own truth.
Yeah.
That's what makes history so interesting.
Yeah, and it's so relevant to our lives today.
And keep sending us those stacks of sources. We're always ready to dive into a new topic.
We are.
And until next time, keep those minds curious.
Keep them curious.
And those perspectives open.